Hi folks, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Ben and I'm a photographer and videographer based in North Wales. This week I've been in lockdown still here in Wales, and my mum gave me the task of digitising all of her old family film slides. This is something I've been meaning to do for a long time, to be honest, with my own 35mm negatives as well. So I finally put a bit of money in and invested in a few things to get set up initially and make it a very smooth, easy process. I did all the research, watched all the other YouTube videos, and decided the best way for me was DSLR, or in my case, mirrorless camera digitising. Really, it's a very simple process, but a lot of the things that you may be looking at are investments. Some things are not cheap for what they are, but if you've already got a pretty decent digital camera, then it's probably the best way of going about it. So in my case, I shoot on Sony cameras. This is the A7 III right now, and this is my main still shooter, the A7R4. So in terms of archival purposes, digitising these old negatives and slides, I decided on the A7R4, you can't really go too wrong with 62 megapixels, so yeah, that's why I went for that one. And then I've paired that with a new lens for me, the Sony 90mm macro lens. This is an f2.8 aperture, though we will not be shooting at f2.8. I'll explain why in a bit. But yeah, this is the first macro lens I've ever owned, and I'm really enjoying it so far, not just for the slides. But in your case, you don't need to get a dedicated macro lens. I did a video not long ago about macro extension tubes. You can get these for Sony as well, and they work with full autofocus capabilities. But for me, I run a business, photography and videography. I've been eyeing up this lens for a long time, so I finally bit the bullet. So first off, I needed a little bit of space to actually do this. So if you're a viewer of this channel, you may be familiar with this angle and also this angle of my desk. But what you probably haven't seen much of before is this side behind the camera right now. So what you'll see most people doing is actually buying a copy stand, and that's what I did as well. If you go on a photography website and look for a copy stand, they can be extortionate. So I, being a poor photographer in 2020-21, I went on Amazon and found one for £40. Ace. Ordered it, it came, it was rubbish. It was not particularly well made. I couldn't really get quite enough height on it, especially for the purpose of scanning film, so I sent it back. So on top of my desk, which I just use as shelves really, is an IKEA Billy bookcase extension, height extension, and it's perfect. This is where I have my camera set up on right now. I use the Manfrotto super clamp with my cage attached at all times, and then I can just take the camera in and out. The cage always has my small HD monitor and Rode Video Micro attached. And then I also have friction arm with the Zoom H5 and the Rode NTG4 Plus microphone, and it is solid. I've never had any worries at all that this thing is going to move. Instead, I have another super clamp, which I've attached a very nice strong ball head to, and I just mount it sideways on the side of the bookcase extension, and it works perfectly. So the super clamps, they're designed for a light stand attachment. So all I did was use one of these light stand adapters with a 1/4 inch to 3/8 inch adapter, screwed that straight into the bottom of my ball head, and it slots straight in. This area on the side of the bookcase is my charging station, basically. I've got all my different camera batteries, monitor batteries, flash batteries, drone batteries, AA, AAA battery chargers attached here with Velcro, so I can just rip them off. Then I just clamped this super clamp onto the side, made sure that my levels on the ball head were level, and job was a good one. The next bit of equipment I needed was a light panel. I did actually buy one of these probably a year and a half, 2 years ago, with the intention of just viewing and taking some phone shots of negatives. But beware, they can be awful. This previous one that I bought, my mum has it now, she just uses it for tracing. For that kind of stuff, it is great, but for negatives, it was horrible. The trouble was there was no real diffusion going on the panel, so you could see all the individual LEDs. So this time I did splash out a little bit more. I paid £40 again for this light panel from Door. This is not a very big panel, about the size of my head. I believe it's about 16 centimeters squared. It's just powered through micro B USB and it works a treat. I will leave links for all of these things in the description down below, but on this one, beware, this turns out to actually be a used light panel. There is an inch long scratch in the top of the panel by here, which is not great, but considering I'm just using it for 35mm film, I can avoid that space really, and really I just cannot be bothered sending it back. The next thing you'll want, rather than placing your negatives directly onto the light panel, is some sort of holder. You can pick these up pretty much anywhere, but after watching a few reviews I did actually decide to go with the Digitalizer with a Z from Lomography, and it works a treat. It is perfect for what I'm doing. This will basically hold your negatives in a strip, nice and tight from either edge, and you're keeping it up elevated off the light panel. And then one final thing you'll probably need is a blower. Very handy to have. So with this all set up, let's get scanning some film. So to set up the camera, I basically attached the super clamp and ball head, and then I used an L bracket on the camera so that the camera was still in my orientation. That way I could still flip the screen up and see firsthand what the framing was looking like. In terms of camera settings, we want to keep our ISO as low as possible, so I was using ISO 100. Aperture wise, I went for f5.6. You will want to stop down a bit for a couple of reasons. One is to avoid any vignetting or distortion from the lens, and also, generally speaking, any lens will probably be very sharp at f5.6 rather than wide open at f2.8, f1.8, whatever your lens is. So for sharpness and distortion control, we're shooting at f5.6. That means the only thing we have to worry about is shutter speed. And this can change between each still. Last night I was converting some Kodak Gold Color 400, and in that case they were all exactly the same exposure for each frame. But I have found, especially with black and white negatives, you may be adjusting it per negative. In my case, I'm using the histogram on the camera's display to expose by. One thing you definitely don't want to be doing is overexposing these negatives. You may be able to pull some detail back in the shadows, but probably not the highlights. In terms of focusing, you want to be manually focusing. You can try and use focus peaking, that may help you, but I prefer not to. On both my Sony cameras, I have the AF on button programmed to focus magnification. So what I'll do is I'll punch into the image, it'll crop in nice and tight, and then in real time I could be focusing. Now what we want to be focusing on, rather than the subject in the frame, is the actual grain of the emulsion. Do be sure to focus on the grain rather than the subject. So then once you've got your focus, you've got your framing, it doesn't matter if you've got a bit of the edge of the frame or the slide in there. Now we need to take the photo. Even though you've got a nice bright light box, your exposure is probably going to be quite a long one. So one thing we definitely want to be avoiding is camera shake, blurry images. So to combat that, I set my camera into a 2-second timer, and then I was also controlling the camera from my iPad. Pretty much every camera manufacturer now has their own app for remote controlling of the camera. I would highly advise looking into this and using it if your camera does support it. Otherwise, use a remote cable release or radio trigger. It just means that we're not physically touching the camera, adding any movement at all when taking the photo. And then that's it. We've got our photograph. So then you just need to repeat this for however many negatives or slides that you have, and then we can get it onto the computer. Now, probably by far the easiest to scan is slide film. These are a few of my mum's old family ones. You can see I've got boxes and boxes of them over there. And you can probably see the stacks of print packs. I've still got negatives for all those, so I've been doing all of that this week. Now then, once they're in the computer, we're going to import it into Lightroom. I thought ahead when I started shooting film. All of my print packets, they're all labelled with the film type and the date as well. So for me and my slight OCD with Lightroom organisation, that worked out great. All my mum's slides, however, none of these have dates on them, but we're pretty sure they're roughly 1968. So we'll import them, get them all into their own collections, and then get to work. So the very first thing that I'll do is I'll go into grid view and I'll just rotate any vertical compositions that I can see. Literally just right click and then rotate clockwise or counterclockwise. Once that's done, it's a very simple process for the slides. All we have to do is crop, adjust our white balance. I find that Lightroom's auto white balance actually works very well in most cases, and in a lot of cases just hitting auto exposure seems to sort out a lot of things. It can go a bit overboard in some cases. It does depend on whether the slide was actually exposed properly in the first place. Some of these were not, but we can just quickly play around and see what we get. Of course, we can also go through and clone out any little bits of dust that we missed with our blower, and a few little loose hairs or bits of fibre that might have ended up on the slide. And yeah, for the slides, that's it, job done. Obviously for the negatives, they're negatives, so we need to invert them. You can do this through Photoshop, but with the volume that I've got, I imagine it would be a pretty tedious process going through one by one. So I decided to try out the free trial of Negative Lab Pro. You probably will have seen this in many other people's videos. I believe it's just one guy called Nate, I think, who got sick and tired of doing the process in Photoshop, doing it one by one. So he developed a plugin for Lightroom, and I have to say, it seems to just work. You can go on the website and get the free trial just to check it out. I will be buying it, I'll be telling you that. I just don't yet have the money. Once you've gone through and installed it, in the develop module, you'll just need to choose your white balance to start with. I find this is best done just off the edges of the film negative. I would suggest do this on the first photo of each roll and then synchronize that white balance with the rest of the roll. Saves you some time. And then hitting Ctrl N will bring up the Negative Lab Pro window. From here, just select how you scanned. So in my case, it's DSLR, mirrorless, or you've got a few other different scanners and stuff. Next, you choose your profile. I quite like the Frontier one, or if they're black and white photos, obviously choose black and white. And then you can just go ahead and convert the negative. Then the plugin will do its thing and you'll be shown the inverted negative. From here you can then start editing. So you have controls to adjust your white balance and basic exposure tweaks, as well as included LUTs. I tend to stick with the Frontier one. These only apply for colour negatives. Black and white you're not going to get anything from them. You also have different curve options. I quite like the soft curve. I've actually done this with most of my negatives, just to see how they are, and then click cancel, just to see how well it actually adapts to different photos and different films. And then once you're happy with it, click apply, and that's it. You can then still carry on in Lightroom, develop to your heart's content, but be aware, because you're working on a negative, most of your sliders, such as exposure, contrast, highlight, shadows, blacks, whites, they will actually be in reverse. And this applies to your tone curve as well. So say if you want to increase your brightness, you actually have to decrease the brightness slider. And the same goes for white balance. So it is a good idea to actually do that in the Negative Lab Pro window while it is still there. And yeah, that's it. Do what you want with your images. You can adjust your colours. I know one big reason a lot of people shoot on film, especially different colour films, is for the colour profiles, especially things like Ektar and Portrait. But you can still adjust your colours if you so wish. And then you've got all your negatives archived. You can make copies, you can export them, send them out to whoever you want, wherever you want. And yeah, it's a pretty simple, great process. So there we go guys, it is that simple. It is a little bit of investment initially, just getting the light panel and whatever sort of support and stuff like that. But for the sake of archiving all of these negatives, bear in mind the chemical process is fantastic, but they're not going to last forever. It will start deteriorating eventually. I did see evidence of that with some of the 6x6 slides. So digitizing them as soon as possible. There is no time like the present, especially if you are also still in lockdown, and I've had a great time looking through all my mum's childhood slides. Obviously you don't need the likes of an A7R4 and a 90mm macro lens. You can be using your Nikon D3300 with a cheap 50mm lens and a macro extension tube. Whatever does the job for you. So that's where I'll leave it. Thank you very much for watching, hope you enjoyed it, hope you may have learned something from it. If you've got any questions about my process or the things that I used, do drop a comment down below, let me know, and I'll be sure to get back to you. If you want to see more videos like this, I will be starting to shoot more film again soon. I've got tons of it in the fridge. Then do be sure to hit subscribe for future videos, and if you like this one, give it a like. Why not? So until the next one, thank you very much for watching, be good, stay safe, get shooting, and I'll see you in the next video.